On the evening of Wednesday, April 10, 1912, Titanic was sailing across the English Channel, headed for her first port of call, Cherbourg, France. In her wake was an exuberant and frenetic departure from Southampton, England, as well as a narrowly averted collision with the moored liner New York that nearly ended her maiden voyage before it began. The trip between the Nab Light at the entrance to the English Channel and the breakwater at Cherbourg, France was a voyage of about 65 nautical miles. Titanic made the trip at just over 20 knots. As the new White Star liner steamed south that afternoon, shipboard life began to take hold for those on board, both passengers and crew alike. One regular feature of daily life on Titanic were the performances of her musicians. The 8 musicians aboard Titanic were formed into 2 groups, a quintet and a trio. The trio primarily played from the first-class restaurant reception room aft on B-deck. However, it was the 5-man ensemble, led by bandmaster Wallace Hartley, that played in other areas of the ship. This quintet performed daily in specific locations and at specific times. We know they performed from 4 to 5 p.m. in the first-class reception room on D-deck, and from 5 to 6 p.m. in the second-class entrance. Then they returned to first class, performing again in the first-class reception room on D-deck from 8 to 9:15 p.m. While the band was carrying out their performances on that Wednesday afternoon and early evening, Titanic was approaching Cherbourg Harbor. The liner dropped anchor inside the harbor at about 6:35 p.m. The custom-built White Star Line tender's pneumatic and traffic hurried out toward Titanic to transfer mail and passengers to and from the ship. Meanwhile, dinner was served in the first-class dining saloon, even as first-class passengers boarded Titanic through the reception room. In fact, some passengers later recalled being able to watch these newly boarded passengers, along with all of the hustle and bustle that accompanied their boarding, through the windows overlooking the reception room while they ate dinner in the dining saloon. At 8:10 p.m., about an hour and a half after arriving, Titanic weighed anchor and began to make way to her next port of call, Queenstown, Ireland. About 10 minutes before Titanic began to depart, the quintet was scheduled to begin performing their evening of after-dinner music in the first-class reception room. Some passengers were still finishing their dinner when the ship weighed anchor. Titanic researchers and historians have tried for over a century to piece together as much data about life aboard the liner in the days leading up to the disaster as they could. Due to their subsequent heroism during the sinking, the band is an area of intense scrutiny and research. Occasionally, a piece of information turns up that paints a remarkably clear picture of a moment in time. For example, a snapshot of the band's performance that night in the reception room has come to light that is truly remarkable. A first-class passenger, whose name has not survived, wrote a letter that was posted from the ship and was later printed in the Belfast Evening Telegraph of April 15, 1912. In it, the passenger wrote, "After dinner, as we sat in the beautiful lounge listening to the White Star Orchestra playing the Tales of Hoffmann and Cavalleria Rusticana selections, more than once we heard the remark, 'You would never imagine you were on board a ship.' Here we have a direct recollection of 2 pieces played after dinner as Titanic was leaving Cherbourg behind." Selections from Jacques Offenbach's Tales of Hoffmann were indeed included in the White Star Line songbook, including the most famous piece from that opera, Barcarolle. Selections from Pietro Mascagni's one-act opera Cavalleria Rusticana, which was first performed in 1890, also appeared in the White Star Line songbook. Although that opera contained a number of selections, the most famous of these was without a doubt the Intermezzo, which bridged the play's 2 scenes. It is likely that this is the very piece that Wallace Hartley and his musicians played in the D-deck reception room as Titanic sailed for her next and final port of call, Queenstown. Without further ado, the White Star Line Quintet presents the Intermezzo from Pietro Mascagni's opera Cavalleria Rusticana, Through this performance, they are recreating a moment from the historic evening of Wednesday, April 10th, 1912.